Well, Canadian automakers have asked Prime Minister Mark Carney to repeal zero-emission vehicle mandates, warning that electric vehicle sales in Canada are decreasing. The association also says it would be impossible to reach the zero-emission vehicle mandate that starts taking effect in 2026. Let's hear more on this from Brian Kingston. Brian Kingston is president of the Canadian Vehicles Manufacturers Association. Brian, thanks a lot for joining us. What exactly has the association urged the government and the Prime Minister to do?
Well, the automotive industry in Canada is under great pressure right now, some of which we can control and some of which we cannot. Of course, the ongoing trade discussions with the US and tariffs on automotive exports are a huge challenge, but we don't control the outcome of that discussion. What we can control is making sure that the Canadian economy is more competitive and that we have policies in place that set automakers up for success. And the EV mandate is impossible to achieve. 20% EV sales in 2026. We just hit sales of 8.7% last month. There is simply no way to close that gap. And if this regulation stays in place, automakers will have no choice but to start restricting internal combustion engine vehicle sales in Canada by the hundreds of thousands. This will be devastating to the industry and dealerships across Canada.
Remind us of who your association represents, who is included in the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association, and how many of them manufacture electric vehicles.
Yes, so we represent Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis, the longest established automakers here in Canada, and all of which have manufacturing presence and have made investments into the EV supply chain. These companies are committed to electrification. There are record numbers of EVs in the market. There's over 100 models now available in every size and segment. The challenge is the consumer demand is simply not there, and it has in fact been collapsing. Just to give you a sense of how big this gap is, an additional 180,000 EVs would need to be sold next year to hit that 20% target. There is no way that that is going to happen.
Why do you think demand for EVs is collapsing?
A few factors at play. First of all, you of course have the tariff situation, which is raising costs throughout the supply chain. But more importantly, there's just a number of barriers to adoption that haven't been adequately addressed. And we're moving now from the early adopters. These were people, typically high-income households, buying a second or third car, keen on the technology. Now we're trying to transition into mass market adoption. So think about your family with one vehicle that does a lot of driving. That's a very different conversation, and that type of consumer has questions about charging infrastructure, vehicle range, and of course price. And right now we don't have the infrastructure in place to hit mass adoption. So we've got to get those preconditions right. Let's work on building out the ecosystem. The consumer will come along, but if you mandate an arbitrary ratio, you're setting the industry and frankly Canadians up for failure.
The government's mandates were for 20% EV sales in 2026, 60% in 2030, and 100% 10 years from now in 2035. That seemed ambitious, if not unrealistic at the time. I think I hear you saying that's simply not possible, 100% by 2035.
We've gone from ambitious to impossible. There's no other way to put it. There was a time a few years ago where you saw year-over-year increases in EV sales at a pretty aggressive pace, but that pace has not continued, and there's just simply no way, in particular, to get to 100%. The math is irrefutable. Going from 2025 to 2026 is going to be impossible, but as that curve starts to increase up towards 100%, there's just no chance that we're going to get there. And look, Canada has some unique conditions as well that were never reflected or understood when this regulation was developed. Canadians deal with cold weather and they drive massive distances. So there will be some applications in Canada where an EV will not make sense. Can we get to high levels of electrification? Of course, but 100% is unrealistic.
What should governments be doing with respect to EVs? Should there be encouragements or mandates at all?
No, two things need to be done. First of all, the mandate has to be repealed before it does massive damage to this industry and the Canadian economy. We already have very stringent emission standards in Canada. That's what automakers comply with. Those standards require electrification. So the best way to think about the mandate, it's like wearing a belt and suspenders. It was an additional regulation for no reason. So repeal the mandate and then focus on those drivers of demand, build out the infrastructure, help Canadians with installing home chargers, build up the electricity grid, make sure that we have enough clean, affordable, reliable electricity across this country. Let's get that in place first. You will see Canadians electrifying, but you can't force it.